everybody, welcome to the Ramble. Today I want to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart as a movie fan, and that is Buster Keaton, one of my very, very, very favorite filmmakers. Even if you're not a big Keaton aficionado, you probably recognize his name, and more than likely you recognize his face, because in fact it's his face for which he is most renowned among general audiences. He was called the Great Stone Face because of his preference when he was giving performances to try and keep a straight face as much as possible. He didn't overreact. In fact, he underreacted to almost everything. He wasn't the sort of actor who would pull a big clowny face when he would react to something. He would maintain his composure to an extreme level. He very rarely showed any obvious emotion in his face at all. That style of acting is one of the things that I think makes him so great, but it's not quite as simple as, well, he just kept a straight face. Because really, anybody with enough control over their facial muscles can do that. That's not what made him such a great actor. And I think he was one of the greatest actors in the history of film, not just in silent era, not just in comedy, but period. I think Buster Keaton is at the very, very top tier of actors in film. And it's not just that he kept a straight face, it's that he understood that just as important as the performance that he was giving as the individual actor was the way that performance was presented in the context of the scene and the film. He wasn't just a guy standing there showing no emotion on his face. Even though he very rarely pulled big faces, and he never indicated what his emotional state was in an obvious way, like we often have an unfortunate stereotype of silent actors doing. If you watch a Buster Keaton film, you almost always can tell exactly what he is thinking and exactly what he is feeling. And that is his genius as an actor and as a filmmaker, is he could do those very, very subtle, very minimal things as an actor, use his face very, very little, and yet he could communicate what he wanted to communicate as an actor to the audience. And it's because he would put himself as a character into situations where it was very easy for the audience to relate to him and to infer what he must be feeling. He allowed the audience to do most of the work, so that when Buster, and by the way, the convention when talking about Keaton is when you're talking about the filmmaker, you mention him as Keaton, and when you're talking about the character, you usually refer to him as Buster. So Keaton, it's the same guy, but Keaton is the filmmaker and Buster is what you call him when he's on screen. But Keaton would place himself, Buster, into situations, very simple, very recognizable situations, so that the audience would be able to tell just from what was happening how he was feeling, because they would know how they would feel in such a situation. When you look at that era, that silent comedy era of the 1920s, there are many names you could bring up besides Buster Keaton. You can talk about, obviously, Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, but really, to me, Keaton is the king of that era and of that style and of that of slapstick humor that isn't just about having people fall down in creative ways, but is really, really inventive and really kind of thrilling when you look at it. When you watch a Keaton movie, it's not just that he's doing funny things and he's falling down or people are getting hurt or, goofy hijinks are ensuing. It's really so well put together and not just clever, but inventive in a way that's just wonderful, wonderful to watch. Buster Keaton loved trains as a filmmaker, and I presume as a person too, because many of his great films from his most active and most celebrated period as a filmmaker include bits of train-related business. There's a train gag in Sherlock Jr., there's a couple of them actually. There's a train gag in Our Hospitality, there's a really famous, really well-done train gag in his great two-reeler 1 Week, and of course, one of his most celebrated films ever, possibly by popular consensus, his greatest film, The General, is all about a train and takes place almost entirely on one. So the guy liked trains. It's a bit of a personal connection for me too, because those very tracks that you see behind me carry trains that my own grandfather used to run. I have a fascination with trains too. In fact, I love trains well before I even knew who Buster Keaton was, or before I knew he liked trains too. It's just part of my family heritage. My grandfather and my great-grandfather on my father's side of the family were railroad men, and their trains ran by the very tracks behind me as a part of first the Western Maryland Railroad, and then the CSX, the Chessie System Railroad that bought out the Western Maryland Railroad several decades ago. But yeah, train connection for me and Buster. One more reason to love the guy. And really it makes sense that Buster Keaton would be fascinated by trains. I'm not sure what his personal reasons for loving trains were, but as a filmmaker, he displayed a consistent interest in technology and in machines. And as a filmmaker, he also showed a great interest and a great aptitude for the technical aspects of filmmaking. And trains are just fascinating machines, aren't they? I mean, maybe you don't feel as romantically about them as I do, or as Buster evidently did, but trains are just fascinating machines, and they're very cinematic. And Keaton recognized that cinematic quality of trains and exploited it, took advantage of it more successfully and creatively than any filmmaker had done before him, and I would argue than any filmmaker has done since. For silent comedy fans, the choice of Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin is a lot like the choice between Star Trek or Star Wars, you know, or Marvel Comics or DC Comics. It's a choice that everybody interested in silent comedy is sort of expected to make. It's just an implicit choice where you have to choose one or the other. Either you're a Keaton guy or you're a Chaplin guy, or you can be a hipster and say you're a Harold Lloyd guy, you know, or a Harry Langdon guy. And if forced at gunpoint to choose, I will choose Buster Keaton. That should come as no surprise. But I have nothing but respect and love for Chaplin, too. And in fact, it's one of those situations where I really don't want to choose, because I don't want to suggest that I respect Chaplin less because I would choose Keaton over him. I think Chaplin was a genius. And I think it's really fascinating to compare and contrast the two, because they're both among my favorite filmmakers and my favorite actors ever, and yet they're so very different, and you can learn so much about one by comparing them and contrasting them to the other. For instance, Keaton was fascinated by the technical aspects of filmmaking, and Keaton as a director was very technically proficient, and as an artist, as a composer of shots, in terms of his camera placement, he was very efficient and very clean and very subtle, and he knew exactly where to put the camera. That to me is like 90% of directing right there, knowing where the best place is to put the camera for a particular shot, for a particular scene. And Keaton was brilliant at that. He had just an instinctive, an intuitive knack for that. And if you look at the composition of Keaton's frame, look at a shot in a Buster Keaton movie and analyze it as if you were analyzing a photograph for its composition. And they're so beautiful, so elegant, and so well set up. And it's not that Chaplin was bad at any of that. It's just that when you watch Keaton's films, it feels like that was a priority. And then within that frame, he gave his performance. Whereas with Chaplin, performance, particularly his performance, was clearly number one. Chaplin was all about capturing the performance. To him, the camera was there as a tool to capture his performance. And for Keaton, even though he gave a brilliant performance, and I would argue an even better performance than Chaplin did, the performance was just one part of a much broader context. The film itself was more than just Buster Keaton's performance. And you can tell that, I think, when you watch a Keaton film versus a Chaplin film. On the wall behind me there, you can see some more examples of what a big Buster Keaton fan I am. Those are drawings of Buster that my own wife did for me for a Christmas present. What was it, several years ago? Several years ago. They are awesome. They're some of my favorite things, and they hang up above our couch in the living room in a place of honor where they can be seen by everybody who comes here, because I just love them so much. I was thinking about Buster and about I guess, the durability of genius the other day. Like, Buster Keaton is 80 years past his due date. You know, we are 80 years removed from the original context in which those great films of his were made. And yet so many people, myself in particular, find him to be so fresh and so funny and so exciting, even though we're looking at films that were made in 1920, 1923, 1925, back long before any of us were born, and in a culture that is so different from the culture that we live in now. And why is that? What is it that endures? I don't know. Maybe it's that Buster, even though he was very much a man of the early 20th century, also seems modern to us today because of his love of deconstruction, because he loved to take things apart and see how they work. That's a very postmodern thing. It's a very postmodern quality. Maybe because he has a combination of both cynicism and sincerity. Because he is, as a filmmaker, interested in deconstructing things. He is, as a filmmaker, interested in themes of transformation. But yet, his films also have a very pure, direct, honest quality to them. He has a very pure heart as a filmmaker, and his characters are all very simple, very pure-hearted characters, very uncomplicated characters, and there's something very easy to relate to about that. I don't know. Maybe it's just that he was just fucking good. You can look at a Buster Keaton film and you can just see just an evident skill and confidence and genius. He didn't think of himself that way. He didn't think of himself as a genius. He famously said once, "How can any man in a flat hat and slap shoes be a genius?" So he didn't think of himself that way, but he was one, by my reckoning and by the reckoning of a lot of people. Check it out. I showed you my pictures. Here's some more proof of my Keaton cred. Okay, this is one of my most prized possessions as a film geek. These are my Buster Keaton DVDs. That is the Art of Buster Keaton box set from Kino Video. That's all of his films from his great silent era, and his two-reelers as well, his shorts. I also have these, also from Kino. These are the Arbuckle and Keaton years, the Fatty Arbuckle and Buster Keaton shorts. And then I have this one from MGM, which collects The Cameraman, one of his very, very best films, and also Spite Marriage, which was his last silent film. The MGM deal came at the end of the 1920s, and he had hoped that it would give him financial security after years of working independently, and unfortunately it really ultimately wound up spelling the end of his independent career, his creative control. He did one more really great film, which was The Cameraman, and then after that he kind of just became a studio hand, and he continued to work for the rest of his life, both in film and on stage and in television when that came around. But and he did some interesting work, and he had moments of brilliance here and there, but he never quite got back to that level of genius that he had gotten to with The General, with Sherlock Jr., with The Navigator, with the two-reeler, 1 Week, with all his really legendary early work, the stuff that he did that we think of when we think of Buster Keaton. His work is available in those DVDs I just showed you. A lot of it is also on Netflix, I think. If not on Netflix, then on Amazon. It used to be on Netflix. It might not be anymore. That's something you'd think I would have checked. But anyway, his stuff is easy to find if you're interested, and I highly, highly recommend it. Sherlock Jr. is a great place to start, because that's my favorite film ever, and it's sort of a bridge between his two-reeler shorts and his longer features. It's only about 45 minutes long, and it's just a perfect little capsule of everything that made Buster Keaton a genius. So if you haven't seen that one, check it out. And maybe after you see that, you'll want to watch some more Buster Keaton movies. I think I overran some of my natural endpoints there.
Yeah, but you can always cut it.
Yeah, I should. You know, what did you say a second ago? I should have cut it when I said he's just fucking good.
Yeah, but then you went on to say some really good things. So, but there were a few times when, you had some good.
What if why don't we just do this? Why don't you ask me why I like Buster Keaton so much?
Okay. Why do you like Buster Keaton so much?
Because he was just fucking good.